ready us together.
Good afternoon, Metro family. Welcome to our October Not Facebook Live. Found out that Facebook, in a much larger sense, is having issues today, so we were unable to use that medium, but our tech guys have got us working through YouTube, and hopefully that's going to work out for you. So thanks for tuning in. Maybe others will join us here as we go forward, but I just want to start by saying how thankful and grateful we are to have our lead pastor, Peter On, back with us today. And I'm going to shoot a couple questions his way, just by way of getting us kicked off today. So Peter, welcome back.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, good. I know that going forward, as we get into different sermons and stuff, you're going to be sharing bits and pieces of your sabbatical with us, which we always look forward to. But is there anything right now that you can share, maybe a little higher level of your sabbatical and some of the things that were meaningful that we might appreciate?
Sure. I think I shared a bit this past Sunday, but I will continue to say one of the key takeaways for me on my sabbatical. First of all, I just want to thank this guy over here, that guy, this gal over here, just for holding the fort down while I was gone. Thank you for the leadership team and our partners for allowing me to go on a sabbatical. You have no idea how much that means to me and helps me to just continue to move forward and feel rejuvenated and refreshed. But I feel like there's two things for me, at least this sabbatical, that I got the most out of. Number one is just really kind of building new relationships with people. Folks, I coach my son's baseball team, so I was able to connect with a lot of different parents and meet some new folks. I have a coaching staff on my team, so getting to know them it was just a real blessing. So just building new relationships, and I think just sustaining and growing the existing ones that I have. And as I'm getting older, I'm realizing how much harder it is to go deeper in relationships with people. And just when you have work, when you got other things to do, sometimes you can just kind of put relationships like on the side. But on this sabbatical, I was really intentional about it. And I was able to go visit a couple of my friends. We kind of met at different locations. I went fishing in Nebraska. I went to South Beach, Miami. Had a great time there, great Cuban food. Then I went to Thailand and spent a week there, and that was a real great experience. We support a missionary out there. I got a friend, and so I was out there. So it was just a real great sabbatical in that way. The second one, more of a personal, just deeply more grateful for God's mercy upon my life. And I shared this past Sunday, but I was at a silent retreat a couple weeks ago, and I just felt like at that moment, God was just kind of showing me all the different sins I've committed as a pastor of this church in the past 13 years. And just being overwhelmed by how you would still have me be here, and it's only because of your mercy. And for me, that was just like really one of those moments, again, of just deep gratefulness to God, of just giving me the ability to continue to do this because of His mercy, not because of what I'm doing, but because of His mercy, and just giving me such a sense of peace with that and a sense of gratitude. So I would say those are probably the two things that really, got me the most during the sabbatical.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Peter. I think this whole business of leading by example is something that you have modeled so well at Metro. And even just stepping out of your role for a couple of 3 months, entrusting the ministry to God, believing that He just wants to rejuvenate you and refresh you, and it sounds like you got your ear on some stuff, and that's awesome. So we're so excited to have you back, and looking forward to the next months ahead. One last question, and then I'm going to actually hand the keys over to you. You're
All
back.
right.
You're in charge. But the last question, there's an assumption here, but what excites you the most about being back at Metro?
First, I've said it multiple times, but there's no place like home. It's just great to be back. I visited churches for the past 3 months, and that's been good. I've learned a lot as well, but there really is no place like home. So I think the thing that I'm most excited about, just to come back and just be part of the leadership team here and just keep leading the church moving forward. I'm excited about that. I'm actually excited about just preaching on Sundays, and in all honesty, sometimes that never in the past it wasn't something that excited me a lot because I'm an introvert, and just kind of speaking in front of people is not necessarily something that gives me a lot of energy. It can be extremely draining for me, but just excited about that, just teaching again on Sundays. And then, you'll learn more as we go along, but we're in the process of just planning out a capital campaign for our church. And I wouldn't say I'm excited about that, but I know it's a necessary step for us to get to the next place where our church needs to go. Like if we can't participate in a capital campaign, and eventually move into a place of our own called Metro Community Center, not a church, but a center, I don't think, the vision of Metro will really be affirmed, and so that's really the big step for us. And I think the sabbatical just kind of helped me to sort of say, okay, you got to get ready for this, and you got to like buckle down and do this. I think we have all the moving parts and the pieces here. This person to my right is a major piece to that, but I feel like we got the right components, the people, and now we just have to, drive it forward. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's just great to have you here tuning in on YouTube. Now, I am not aware if you could actually post questions on our YouTube live page, but if you are a lot more tech savvy than me and you're able to figure that out, I am actually watching our live broadcast as we speak. And so as a result of that, if you do find a way to put up a question, I can probably find it, and then I'll make sure we try to answer it. But for some of you watching, a lot of you have asked questions, and they are all fantastic questions, and we want to do our very best to kind of go through all of them, and in hopes that we can, answer them to the best of our abilities, and maybe can kind of help you along the way. The first one is this. The question that we got was, as a church dedicated to social justice, what are some of the pertinent issues on each of your hearts, 1, 2, 3, 4, especially in light of recent current events? And so kind of as a church dedicated to social justice, what are some of the pertinent issues each on your hearts, especially in light of recent current events? And so why don't we just start with David?
Okay, thanks, Peter. A few foundational issues come to mind to begin with. One is that of just education, because I think we know that there are some people here in America, for example, Mike Ditka, who may not even be aware that there are any social issues of justice in the world. So I think just some basic education that there are some issues that we face in our beloved country, America. I think too that another thing is important is for us to listen and to listen to each other, because I think we are very prone to just shout and to shout our own perspectives. So for example, this whole issue of athletes kneeling, there's so many different interpretations to it. There are some who said it's a show of our nationalism, and so if we kneel, we're showing a lack of loyalty to our country, disloyalty to veterans. So that's one perspective. Another perspective is that we live in America, the land of the free, and so we need to be able to have freedom of expression. And then there are others who said, no, this kneeling is actually to address some issues in America, either of injustice in the judicial system or the law enforcement. And so we need to be able to understand those issues. And then we also need to communicate with each other in a civil way. Unfortunately, social media has made us very uncivil in the very brutal and cruel way that we interact with each other. And then more importantly, from a Christian perspective, the whole issue of unity. Regardless of the differences of opinions we have and gun control or the kneeling of athletes, we need to say that, okay, we are all one in Christ, and therefore we need to show that unity in spite of our differences. And then the other obvious thing is that of action. We can talk about stuff, but we need to take personal and community action.
So as a resident theologian, I'm sure a lot of people watching would probably want to ask you this question. What is your take, or where do you side on with this whole kneeling issue? What is your understanding? Like, what would be the thing that, do you agree with the players kneeling, taking that stand? Do you think they should stand up and stand up during during the Pledge of Allegiance and during the national anthem? What is your take, David?
Well, of course, we need to see initially why Kaepernick knelt,
Yeah.
and that was the last of the options that I gave. To my mind, here's a case where I don't see a black and white issue where one is completely right and one is completely wrong. I think it's a matter of conscience. So I mean, like the whole issue of meat offered to idols, whether we eat or not, or whether we're vegetable eaters or meat eaters. I would say that based on conscience, which from a Christian perspective is conviction of the Spirit, then we take bold action, not based on peer pressure, not based on any other factor, but based on just our convictions and our ability to explain why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Kevin, how about you? What's going on? What's been on your heart?
You know, as I looked at the question, Peter, the thing that came to mind is, what Paul says in Romans chapter 12 when he says we're transformed by the renewing of our minds. And, I've realized that I really can't affect transformation in anybody else's minds. I can say things, I can encourage things, but what I'm really responsible for is myself. What are my blind spots? Where are the areas that I have been believing the wrong thing and that have led me to maybe action that wasn't the best or whatever? So I've really been trying to allow God to speak to me, to do his transforming work in my own mind, acknowledging that I don't have a corner on wisdom. I have opinions. Other people have opinions as well. But I really want God to renew my mind so that I can engage in the healthiest possible way with issues of social justice, and not just have my knee-jerk reaction of trying to fix something or something like that.
So Kevin, help me on this. You were a missionary in Venezuela for how many years?
10.
10 years. As somebody in your position, you went to a foreign country, you learned how to assimilate to that culture, you learned how to assimilate to an Amazon culture in many ways. I think a typical person would say, well, that's different. It's easy for you to say because you're a missionary, you have that kind of a background. Help the people who are watching, who really struggle with this Americanism, this way of thinking in a certain way. How do we become open to other views, other worldviews? How are you able to do that? Because it couldn't have been that easy for you. I'm sure there were some challenges along the way. How can you encourage our viewers to be more open-minded? What is the steps that they may need to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. Things like for example, white privilege or white supremacy. I've come to realize that they are pervasive in many cultures, not just in our country, but in other countries as well. But it's not often recognized that white privilege, white supremacy is actually an issue. And one of the books that I think you and I are probably both reading right now, the author brings out that whole concept, and he really gauges where a person is in this journey in terms of their comfort with even acknowledging that white supremacy is an issue. And I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with me on that. So I saw that there in Venezuela. I saw the way the indigenous people were treated by their own countrymen and women. And it's really not very different than what our country's history has experienced, and that we're still living with the residue of that. So I think the whole black-white issue, which I think is huge in our country today, was kind of off my radar screen for the years that I lived in South America. But I think in more recent years, my eyes have been open more to that.
So I have another question for the panel here, and Sunita, please feel free to join in. Let's use this example, as you just talked about white privilege. Let's say a white person really has done the job of reading. They've done the job of connecting. They've done the job of sitting down with other people, everything. But still they conclude that they don't believe that white privilege is something that is still very prevalent in our culture today. Is that acceptable to you? Are you okay with that? Or do you still feel like they just haven't done enough? Like, where are you in that spectrum? Because I think the thing that we shouldn't accept is the fact that people who are not willing to learn, to explore, but if people have actually taken those steps, all of those steps that of trying to learn more, and yet they still feel the same way, maybe change a little bit, but still at the end, they still feel the same way, that perhaps it's not as prevalent as people like to say it is. How would you respond to that? And do you think it's acceptable then? Like at that point, do you feel like, well, at least you've done your homework, at least you've tried. At that point, I'm at peace now with where you're at. I don't know. Anything? How about you? What would you like to say to that?
Yeah, so I don't think people are going to like my response to
it's
this.
okay.
But I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But I'm okay with it because I think everyone's journey is different.
That's right.
I think people learn at different stages, and I think over time people come to an understanding. And so I'm happy that someone is even trying to understand. That, to me, that's overwhelming. I also think that the learning has to be done on both sides.
Yeah.
So I have tried very hard, and I'm still trying to understand what it's like to not see white privilege. So I need to understand, what does it mean to live in a country and see these things and we have different outcomes? Like, we come to different conclusions when we both look at the same thing. You know, it happens in Christianity. We both read the same Bible, and yet we come to different conclusions. Like, why is that? And so for me, it's a learning experience as well. And so I still have hope, maybe because I'm a Christian, that, you know, one day they'll get to a place where they understand. But my biggest hurt, you know, particularly from the church body, is that we haven't come to a point where we can mourn with those who mourn. And so I understand that, you know, you will never know what it's like to be a Black woman, right? And I'll never know what it's like to be a Korean man or a white man. But having lived alongside of you, having spoken to you, that at some point in our relationship, I trust your experience. And I trust what you have to say about your experience. And that I can say, you know what, I've never been a Korean man, but I can hear from what you're telling me about what it was like to become an immigrant into this country.
And be emasculated in this culture.
Yeah. And what's that experience. So I don't understand it because I haven't lived it, but I trust your experience, and because I'm in relationship with you, I'm gonna walk alongside you in that. Wow. And I'm gonna mourn with you when you mourn for DACA, for people who are experiencing issues and concerns around DACA or Muslim bans or whatever the situation is. And that's the part that breaks my heart about our church, not Metro, but the Universal Church, that we haven't come to a place where even if we can't wrap our minds around every single piece of the problem, that I just can't trust my relationship with you and walk alongside you and mourn when you mourn and rejoice when you rejoice. You know, if someone died in your family, I would never say you don't deserve to cry. You don't deserve to be upset. But when Black bodies are being killed, I just can't mourn with you in that. When people are saying that they're concerned about whether or not they're going to leave the only land that they know. I don't know what that's like, but I should be able to get to a place where I can mourn with you.
Man, that's dropped the mic good. I just want to say, I said I was gonna go bam, but you know, when people used to ask, "What's the vision of our church?" I said, "Yeah, we're transformation." But say, what does that look like? And one of the things I would always say is this: I said, the day that I retire from this church will be the day when we stop offering theological answers as to why you're going through your pain, but we just offer you a shoulder to cry on. That we can just lend a shoulder and cry with you, because that's the ultimate form of love. That if you love someone and they're mourning and it doesn't affect you, it's not Christian in many ways. I mean, Jesus mourned when Lazarus' sisters were dying over his death. He mourned, even though he was going to raise him from the dead. And so it's just. I thought what you just shared was just so key and poignant for the church today. Is why can't we mourn with those who are mourning within the church? You know, why do we have to, unfortunately, take it out and secularize it and take away what God's called us to do and mourn with those who are hurting today? And it's just it's a real sad reality. Any thoughts from you two?
You know, I certainly don't disagree with what Pastor Sunita just shared, but I think I would temper my response just a little bit to say that I'm not okay with that if somebody is in a stuck position. If somebody gets to the point where they, you know, like you said, they've done the reading, they've had the conversations, you know, and then they drive a stake in the ground and say, this is where I am, this is where I stay, white privilege doesn't exist or whatever. 10 days ago, I had a conversation with a woman of color who is married to a very white man, And she shared with me how when she's out in public by herself, in a business, in a restaurant, in a store, whatever, that she's treated very differently, noticeably differently than when her husband is with her.
Right.
Now this isn't Jim Crow, this isn't 50 years ago, this is last week. And there's no way that I'm going to deny that her experience is accurate, because I believe and know that it is.
Yeah.
So as long as people are moving, as long as there's some forward motion, we've kind of all heard this analogy, if a ship is not moving, you can't change direction. But if it's at least moving, then it can be steered a little bit.
Wow, thank you.
So that's kind of where I land.
Thank you. What about you, David?
Just to add another perspective, and I think that regardless of who we are, we all have our prejudices. We don't come with a completely neutral background. And these predispositions affect how we do our research or how we do our study. So that we're often looking through things with our own lenses. And for people who are genuinely open or claim to genuinely open, I would say, examine perspectives from both sides, your side and the other side. And it's not as if it's all or nothing at all, because sometimes there's truth in what some people say, and sometimes there's disagreement or untruth. So I'd say, okay, let's be fair in making that distinction. But at the end of the day, I would say that the main thing is, how am I or how are we making a kingdom difference in our lives, in the lives of people, and particularly in the relationships that we have with people, and in this particular context, the relationships that we have with people of color. How do we relate to them as people who are created in the image of God, and who are loved by God, and who Jesus died for? How are we making that difference, either in building community with them if they're Christ followers, or in being good news to them and sharing good news to them?
Great, thank you. I think the only thing I would add to that simply, and I thank you for sharing what you shared. I think as well, if you've done the studies and you've done the best you can, you've connected with people, you've talked to them, you're in relationships with people of color, and you still come to the conclusion that white privilege doesn't exist, I don't know if I would say it's acceptable, but I would be okay with it. I'd be okay with it, and I still would love to just continue to connect and talk and continue that dialogue with you. I cannot tolerate if you are unwilling to. That's the part of it. I will say also that I think I got this during my sabbatical as well, but I just felt like at some point social media can just be such a dividing platform for Christians in the church that I actually stopped liking anything, even though I agreed with it and stuff like that, just because I felt like it can be so divisive. And I think for a lot of us, when we post stuff on social media, we love to voice our opinions, and I think that's why it's there. But can I just caution you today, if you're doing that kind of stuff, if you are posting your stances on how you see things in life, that's great, especially with race and race relations in this country. My encouragement to you is that if you don't have outside relationships and you're not talking to people about this stuff face to face, you shouldn't put it on social media. Because if that's your main platform to how you want to get your message out, I think that's wrong. It's not the way to do it. It's not a very Christian way to do it. The way to do it is to sit down and have conversations with people. Yesterday I had dinner with a friend of mine who is an avid Trump supporter. And it's imperative for myself to surround myself with people also that may not think like me, and just continue to sit and be in dialogue and to have healthy discussions about it. And I just think that's an important aspect, because I think too much today, especially with a lot of the people on social media, is that we have this platform that we can voice our opinion, but if we don't have the relationships to back it up and trying to grow as a human being, I just don't think you should be voicing a lot of your opinions on social media. That's just my take on that, and I just kind of wanted to mention that on that particular subject. Let's go to another question, and this is somebody wrote this, and this is probably somebody in our church, and so I hope one day we can have a sit-down conversation with you. But would Metro ever consider sponsoring a Black History/Civil Rights class that would help our church understand the deeper pain and struggle of racism in America and move beyond the window dressing, nicety/coolness of being part of a diverse church? Would we ever consider doing that? Any thoughts?
I absolutely think we would consider it. I think we would be wide open to that, and that's part of the direction that we're moving. And we make certain opportunities available right now, but I think in the future we're going to see more. And just to even have people suggest something like that, I think is really where we want to be right now, because we want to know what desires do people have at Metro. So yeah.
Yeah, I personally would love to do something like that. My friend Alex in Madison is literally teaching Black History/Civil Rights classes. I think it's like a 2-month course that he offers, and the majority of the people who actually attend it are actually white people. And he's got professors teaching it at the University of Wisconsin coming, so it's just a great thing, and a lot of amazing things can happen through it. So, Sunita, what are your thoughts? You'd probably be one of the teachers. That's your education.
That's my background. So I was an African American Studies major. This is what I love, and I think it'd be great. I think it's nice to do it in a community setting where you can engage and you can talk and that there's dialogue. And I think sometimes in a university setting, it's people's motivations are different. But if you're in a nice community setting where you're getting the information, but you're able to talk and engage with people and live it out, particularly even if it was just, thinking about ways in which history has come to this community. I mean, the school that was torn down used to be the segregated school, used to be the school for Black kids, and there were, Rosa Parks came to Inglewood. And all these things. So I think there are ways that you can have the discussion and really engage people and even make it local. So
that
definitely
would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just be really great if we can do something like that. So whoever asked that question, thank you for that. But also, we'd love to, for those in our church who feel like maybe we're not talking more and we're not going deep enough on this topic, it'd be great for us to continue that dialogue, because I think Kevin and I, when we first saw that question, we thought, wow, we think we're doing quite a bit on it, and we've been dealing with some folks within our church and in the past who've decided to leave our church because they felt like it was too much for them and so forth, and we get that, we understand, we want to be sensitive to it. So I just think it's just really good for us to be in constant dialogue about it, with it. And so David, what about you? I'm sure anything when it has to do with classes and education, you are a huge proponent of that.
Well, before I address that, I would want to make an unashamed pitch for our necessary discipleship modules or courses.
You couldn't help yourself, could you? Yes, absolutely.
Because I think that there are some basic essential things that we need to do as a church that only the church can do. So, we have designed 12 basic discipleship modules. Things like the EHS, which should be one, emotional health and relationships another. Kevin is working on one on financial stewardship. I've asked Anita to work on one on justice and mercy. I've been working on things like New Testament for novices, Old Testament for novices. I'm actually doing a SHAPE workshop at the Student Ministry Retreat this weekend. So, these are some basic core courses or foundations that we need for the faith. But we also need other courses which are of relevance and importance to us. And I think stuff like this, in terms of this type of history, is necessary for us to understand and appreciate and have a better understanding of people who are we actually rubbing shoulders with, either in church or outside church. So whatever helps for us to be more educated to the point where we're more transformed in our actions is worth it.
Okay. Well, I think the discipleship module and all that stuff that David and Pastor Mike has been kind of talking through, it's really exciting, because it's not just you two kind of figuring this out, but you're getting the entire staff involved and be a part certain modules. I think that's really exciting. What would you like to say, and this is one of the questions here, to a certain person perhaps in our church, or maybe just somebody watching right now, where they're so passionate about civil rights, like it's the stuff they think about all the time. How can they get more involved in it beyond self-education? Like, what are some things, and this person even said they like to pursue it as a career path, perhaps. How can they align that with their passion for Christ? Any thoughts on that?
Come see me.
She can help you, no problem.
But I think we have a very narrow vision of civil rights, and I think we have a very narrow vision of social justice. So,
talk to me about that.
So, for example, I am super passionate about education, and it is a civil rights issue because education of people of color and poor people looks differently than it does for the wealthy, than it does for a lot of white communities. And that is a civil rights issue, right? But it doesn't, it's not Kaepernick on the football field, right? But I think what the football players have shown us is that you can take an issue and right where you are, aim a spotlight on it. And I think that's what's so exciting about what these NFL players are doing, that they've said, you know what, we are really upset about police brutality, and we have this forum, let's see what we can do within this context. And so I think a career move, or vocationally, all those things look different for different people. You may, decide that you're going to totally devote yourself to some particular vocation, or within your current occupation, you highlight a civil rights issue, or you highlight some injustice. But I definitely think that we need to expand what we think of as civil rights. There's housing discrimination, there's education, there's financial inequities, poverty issues. There's so many different ways in which race infiltrates itself into our systems that, and they all become civil rights issues in different ways. Economically, environmentally, where are bus depots placed? Where are garbage facilities placed? Sewage treatment plants, right? Where are we mining? So all those things are civil rights issues, and so I think it's about expanding what we view as civil rights and really thinking deeply about where is my passion, and moving from that place of passion. And so come talk to me.
Excellent. Step one, go talk to her. Yep. Step one. I would also just say, it's important not to think so macro all the time, because a lot of times we think about, well, how can I go and change the world? And I think, God can use you to change the world, but let's just do it one life at a time. So start off small and within your own world in which you live in, and figure out how God could use you in that way. But I think just thinking small is a better way than thinking just so grandiose. But that'd be sort of my advice on that. But anything else, you guys, before we move on to the next question?
I just want to throw in the Covenant Justice Conference, which is coming up later this month. One of our sister Covenant churches just across the river, New Rochelle, New York. We partner with them on this conference. Happens once a year. The 20th and 21st of October. And whoever asked the question, said beyond self-education. This would be like a next step beyond self-education, getting in an environment where you're hearing from different speakers, different experts, getting into some workshops and breakout groups. Great way to expose yourself to a lot more. And probably your question about vocation could be addressed in a context like that. So Pastor Sunita is handling the signups for that. So shoot her an email. I know a lot of us.
And she's speaking at it.
Yeah, a lot of us are going to be there, and I'd love to have you join us.
Love to have you join us. I just to give you a little more information, if you're, I don't know the website address to the church. CovJustice.org. CovJustice.org. Sign up for that. A lot of us are going to be there. It's going to be a great conference.
Well, just as an additional thing, I'd want to commend the person who asked the question, because they have taken some steps already. They have taken steps in being informed, and they are serious about pursuing their purpose and passion for which God created them. So those are very two commendable things. I'd also say, too, that we're not alone in this. And so they're going to be like-minded individuals that you'll find with the same burning heart and passion that you have. Maybe at the church, maybe somewhere else. There are organizations that you'll find. There are churches that you'll also find that have an emphasis on these issues and have options for you to serve. So, I think these are some steps that you can take to really fulfill the purpose which God placed you on this planet.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the other questions, and we'll kind of wrap it. We have a few more questions left, but how is Metro working to combat racial discrimination / prejudice within members of the church and within the community? How are we doing that as a church? How are we doing it to fight racial discrimination / prejudice within members of the church and within the community? Oh, the silence. Would anyone like to participate and go first? Go for it, David.
Well, I think I'd want to place it in a more positive perspective. So in terms of like racial discrimination, I'd say what are we doing at promoting racial equality? And then positive in terms of racial prejudice, the whole issue of racial harmony. What are we doing to promote that? So in terms of not just addressing the negative,
That's right.
but focusing on the positive aspects.
Yeah.
And again, it's twofold. It's an individual thing and it's a community thing. So we have a personal responsibility. We can't wait for the church to take action, but it's also community responsibility. It's also information, knowledge, but it's also relationships. So we can get the facts, but we also need to develop honest relationships with people so we can have a better understanding. And then I think one of the things we can do is that we can show the unity most powerfully by serving together in areas of service that honor God and that honor people.
Great stuff. I think for us, just kind of talking a little bit about what David said, just re-echoing it, we do our best to see how do we bring greater equality, how do we do shared leadership, how do we share the power ethnically within our church, that's and gender and gender as well. So those are all important questions that we always ask ourselves. Are we doing a good job in that? And things like that. So I think those are key. You cannot control or control what every person in our church thinks. There will be people who are quite vocal, which I applaud. That's at least they're being honest. And then there are those that are very quiet about it, and we wouldn't know because they wouldn't be sharing it with us. So there's no really way of knowing it. So I think it is a collaborative effort. Like if you're a part of our church and you're in conversations with different people and they say something that perhaps you feel offended, I think it's important that you share it in a loving way so that there's deeper understanding and deeper understanding of each other's culture and who we are. I think that's really key. I think Dinners for 8 tried to establish that. And I know Sunita is going to try to see if she can figure out doing something else, like a hybrid version of a Dinner for 8, which I think would be great. But we're trying our best. Sunita is going to be leading an underground group starting on Thursday that really talks about, understanding different races, different cultures in America, and particularly in our church, and how do we, as a community, how do we learn from our stories, and how do we learn to now be a community? So there are some things we're doing, but we got to get better, of course, and we're trying to organize something with Black churches and Korean American churches, and then of course our church was a multi-ethnic church, all coming together for like a conference sometime next year. We're hoping to do that. And just that can be an opportunity where we all come together and learn and grow and learn to worship our God together. So we're looking into that potentially as well for next year sometime. So that's just me. Anything else for you two? Anything you want to mention?
Nothing on me.
Okay. So listen, there was this amazing question that all the questions were amazing, but I really applaud the person who asked this question. If I realize that God is not enough for me, that despite his sacrifice, I need something else, something worldly, am I a Christian fraud? I feel disingenuous. After years of trying, I cannot reconcile Christianity with my personal drives and desires. First of all, I just think you are definitely ahead of most people on a spiritual level, just by the fact that you can ask a question like that. Most Christians will never ask that question. In fact, I think they live in a denial in many ways. So I would say first and foremost that you being able to ask a question like that already says that you're a person of deep reflection and you're processing and you're wrestling with this, okay? So having said that, folks, pastors, what would you say, what would you like to say to this person who cannot reconcile their Christianity with their personal drives and desires? Or God's not enough?
I would say to this person, I would echo what Pastor Peter said. Thank you for being willing to even throw this question out there. And based on what you've written here, I'm making some assumptions. But my encouragement to you would be to not try to explore this on your own. I'm sure you've already done that. Even the depth of your question says that you've done some digging here. But I believe these are the kind of issues that God addresses in community. And I think that I know many folks on our pastoral staff that would love to sit down with you and have this conversation, but then they would probably also encourage you, as I know I would, to be in some close community with some trusted followers of Jesus Christ, that you could explore this together, because that seems to be where God does his best work in these kind of things, when we're not just isolating ourselves with the deep questions like you're asking here.
Great. Anyone else? David, I'm sure you got some thoughts.
Lots of thoughts. First of all, again, my appreciation for the honesty and authenticity of asking that question, because other people have those questions, but they probably are afraid to ask. I think in Jesus' day, there are indications that there are people who are true and who are false disciples. So let's put that out front. So, Jesus' parables of the kingdom of the wheat and the weeds. Jesus' parable of the sheep and the goats. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of churches have a lot of goats in them right now. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which we applaud and revere, probably because we don't study it that well, is that the last part of it actually is a very sobering thing. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." So there are some basic requirements for being a disciple of Jesus. And unfortunately, we have inadvertently sold the spiritual BS in the past, where all we need to do is raise our hand, pray the sinner's prayer, and we have a fire insurance policy out of hell, and we can live as we please. Well, we've seen different writers in recent days, David Platt, Kyle Adelman, Craig Groeschel, in terms of the Christian atheists, where some of us live as if God is not Savior and Lord of our life. And I think when we become a Christian, it's not just that we have Jesus as Savior, but Jesus is also Lord as well. There are two modes of existence. Living katasarx, according to the flesh, according to our human desires, and katapneuma, according to the spirit. And so one who is truly born of God is moving towards living a life according to the Spirit of God, rather than according to our human flesh. And again, our faith is not about me. It's about God and God's plan and purposes for my life. And I think we make the mistake of thinking of Christianity as that of trying to be a Christian. Well, if you follow the New Testament principles of what it means to be a Christian, first of all, it's trusting our faith that our salvation is based not off our works, but of the grace and goodness of God and the exercise of our faith. But it's also about training. So it's not trying to be a good Christian, it's training, and training is hard. Training is saying no to my sinful self and saying yes to God.
Yeah. Great. Sunita, anything for you?
No, I totally agree. The first thing I thought was stop trying. And I know that's hard to say because the tendency is to try and work your way through. But this is grace, right? And also to recognize that faith is a gift from God as well. And that this is a journey. We're not going to get it all right away. And I love the honesty in the question. And I do think community is important to think about these things and to see where our blind spots are. And also to not give up on wrestling with God. You know, the blessing comes through the wrestling. The blessing comes through the perseverance, through the endurance, and not the trying, but the seeking. Yeah. And so I absolutely agree with what Pastor Kevin and Pastor David have already said, but also to relax and give yourself a break and trust God in the process of your of your journey. That we're not all at the same place at the same time, and what looks like faith isn't always faith, you know, as we've described. But I let go a little bit and let God work in the process, and get around some great people who can continue to speak life into you and encourage you.
Now, if this person is anything like me, what I'm about to say, I hope you can take this and kind of reflect upon it. But I would simply just answer this by saying it's really not about you. And I think this question is tailored in a way where it's become about you. Perhaps maybe you think about faith in such of a martyr kind of a way. It's all or nothing kind of a thing. And you want to feel so good about yourself, or you feel like, you know, that you have to attain a certain level of spirituality to sort of, you know, get there, and then you feel like you're really living the Christian life. It's not about you. God accepts you in your brokenness. He loves you in the midst of that brokenness. He's not calling you necessarily to be a martyr. And the problem, I think, with a lot of us is that God is not enough for us because we are too enough for us. Our worldview is just centered around us. And if we can learn to take ourselves out of that and put God there the best we can, I think then we can really grow better, because then like what Sunita just said, it's not, you can give yourself a break and you realize this is a journey and a process, and God doesn't expect you to do this overnight. We are our own worst enemies many times, and I feel like it's so imperative that the first thing we try to do in any kind of discipleship is that we try to put aside or to die to our own selves so that God can truly come and work with us, so that we can forgive ourselves when we mess up, that we're not down on ourselves when we do commit a sin, that we can confess it, but that we know that this is a journey and a process, and that as you fall, that you may get back up and keep walking the path in which God has for you. And that, you know, requires an amazing selfless kind of a way of following God. When faith becomes all about you, then it's very difficult, because then you're trying to attain a certain level of spirituality, which I don't think any of us can really attain. So that would just be me, and if I offended you, my apologies for that. We're pretty much running out of time right now. I kind of want to move this along. I do believe there's a question here: is the pastor and the leadership team, the pastoral staff, ever going to share the vision and plans and intentions for Metro Community Center? Absolutely. We will do that live on Facebook or YouTube, and we will do it on Sundays. We'll communicate it in every platform that we possibly have. We are right now working with a consulting group to just kind of help us with all of that, so that we can all be on the same page and really work through that. So we will definitely do that. And I hope, I mean, maybe we can just end with this. Sunita, the question is, what is your vision for Jack and MCC?
Oh.
What do you envision for the future?
It's so much. It changes so much. So Steve Bang and I just went to meet with a bunch of students at Dwight Morrow High School for Metro Life. And
explain what Metro Life is for those who don't know what that is.
So Metro Life is living in freedom every day. It is our program, basically an after-school program for kids here in at Dwight Morrow in Inglewood. And the idea is that we walk alongside them while they're in high school, exposing them to things that they, outside of Inglewood, things that they wouldn't necessarily get on their own. We provide tutoring, we provide mentorship, helping with the college application process, college tours. We're helping them design their resumes and get jobs and SAT prep. And we're really trying to help them in their high school experience. And Steve and I left that conversation with their students just thinking about, wow, what if we could actually help every kid at Dwight Morrow? What if we could actually do something that would transform their lives and give them something that the school doesn't offer? So, my vision for Metro Community Center is certainly to fill in the gap with our young people here in Inglewood. It's certainly to think about how we can give them opportunities and exposure that they otherwise wouldn't get. For Jack, and this is something that we've talked about as a pastoral team, and particularly with Pastor David, is that Jack is not just something that happens at Metro, but it's what we're all a part of, that we're all involved in some sort of ministry that pulls on our gifts but allows us to serve. And not just within the church, but outside of the church. And that's going to look different for each person. And what I've really been praying about is how do we help people figure out where their passion is and help them connect with something. So one of the great examples, and I'll keep this quick, there's a woman who is a part of our prison ministry. She just started, she comes, but we only go to the prison 4 times a year. But she is so passionate about this that what she did is she has started training with a program called PD Green. It's not affiliated with Metro, but it's a program that tutors inmates. And she has a teaching background, and she has a passion for prison ministry, and she's able to do this. And that the launching pad was her involvement with prison ministry here at Metro. And to the extent that we can help people figure out their passion and connect them with something that may not be directly tied to Metro, but certainly allows them to serve and use their gifts for the glory of God and to deal with some of these issues that we've talked about previously.
Wow, that's great. Thank you, Sunita. My last question I have for you two, 30 seconds to those who are watching. As a pastor, person leading this church, what would you like to say to them before we wrap up?
I've been impressed lately that there are a lot of marriages that are struggling at Metro. And what I would like to say to you is don't give up. It's too easy just to kind of throw your hands up and say this isn't going to work, and either just live in something that is so far less than what God has designed for you, or even walk away from the relationship. But please come and talk to somebody. Please let somebody know that. And please be humble enough to seek and receive some help, because help is available. I believe that marriage is one of the hugest battlefields in the Christian church, because God designed marriage to reflect something very, very heavenly. And that means that there's going to be attacks always. We have to be prepared for those. We all experience it. So if you're in that place, don't give up. Contact one of us, please.
Well, I just say that if we were deluded by the fact that the Christian life was an easy one, welcome to reality. Being a Christian actually adds and complicates life. We're called to a life of suffering, so, welcome to reality. But it is not an easy or easier life, but it is the best one for this life and the next. And also, contrary to the American culture, we do it together and not alone. So we do it in community. So, there's joy in the journey when we walk together and serve together and learn to love each other more.
Well, thank you. My last thing, there's a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. Just backtracking to the Metro Community Center, because we're on YouTube.
Okay.
Is the opportunity to help dream for the Metro Community Centre going to be available to partners or parishioners to be involved with that process?
I would say for partners for sure, and you need to talk to this wonderful lady to my right here. go see her. And I think this is a great time because Sunita just started it back in August. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to share. But if you're going to share, I would just say, Sunita, you got to be willing to back it up. You can't just be throwing ideas and just walk away and say, well, good luck with that. Because we have a lot of consultants out there. But your ideas have to be something you're willing to die for.
That's right. Show your stuff.
You'll be willing to sacrifice for. And if you are, then we would really love to hear it.
Absolutely.
Because, what inspires you and maybe a vision God gives to you could be something that maybe we do here at the church. And if not, I hope you don't get offended, but hopefully we'll definitely listen, and I know you will, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. My last thing I would simply say is this: we're not a perfect church. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we will continue to do so. I would just say this, and if there are things that you might have continuously that you want to share, things that you might have against our church or things that we might have done wrong, let's keep the dialogue open. And I think, the thing as a senior pastor that hurts me the most is when people leave without even saying goodbye. And, if we're a family, we need to communicate and talk things through. And we're doing the best we can. And I just think Metro Community Church is a real special community. And I just will continue to invite you to be a part of this, be a church of transformation, to be a part. And God's given us the front row seat to do something that's not being done very widely in this entire country, to bring people from all walks of life together, to find a commonality in their weaknesses, and through that, Jesus' strength is perfected in it. It's this new wineskin thing. And so I hope that you can be a part of this journey with us and realize that we're doing the best we can, but we will make mistakes at the same time. You guys have been so great, and gals have been so great for joining us this week. We hope to join you again next month and the months after that as well. But thanks so much. Continue to throw in the questions. Send us your questions. We'd love to continue to answer them, and we'll continue to ask what are the next things we should cover. If you have any show ideas or topics, let us know, and we'd be happy to talk and discuss about that. This live thing that we're doing is not for us, it's for you, and we would love it to serve and meet a need in your life. So thanks so much for watching.